The rain fell in thin, relentless sheets, soaking the cobblestone path that led to the towering gates of Blackthorn Estate. I pulled my shawl tighter, my fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of returning to this place after so many years. At 78, I had no business standing in the rain. But some calls cannot be ignored, not when they come from the ghost of a man who shaped your life and then left you to fade into the shadows. My name is Eleanor Grayson, though they never called me that here. To the Blackthorn family, I was the help, the quiet widow who scrubbed their floors, mended their linens, and listened to their secrets without ever being seen. For 30 years, I served Charles Blackthorn, the patriarch whose wealth and influence stretched across the county like the roots of the ancient oaks that lined his estate. Charles was a man of contradictions, stern yet kind, distant yet observant. He saw me when no one else did. And that, I suppose, was the beginning of everything. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, delivered by a courier who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. It was an invitation to the reading of Charles's will, a formality I hadn't expected to be part of. Charles had passed a month prior, his death sudden and shrouded in whispers. The estate, once a beacon of grandeur, now stood half in ruin, its gardens overgrown and its windows dark. Yet here I was, summoned back to a place that had never truly been mine. As I approached the gates, I saw them, the Blackthorn heirs. Charles's children, Margaret and Victor, stood under black umbrellas, their faces pinched with impatience. Margaret, in her 50s, had the sharp beauty of her youth dulled by years of resentment. Victor, younger but no less hardened, wore a suit that screamed wealth but couldn't hide his unease. They didn't acknowledge me as I passed, their eyes sliding over me as if I were part of the scenery. Invisible, as always. Inside the grand hall, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrow, stood at the head of a long mahogany table, his expression unreadable. A handful of distant relatives and business associates filled the room, their murmurs a low hum of anticipation. I took a seat at the back, my hands folded in my lap, and waited. Mr. Harrow cleared his throat. We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Charles Edward Blackthorn, he began, his voice steady but laced with something I couldn't quite place. Before we proceed, I must note that Mr. Blackthorn made specific provisions that may surprise some of you. Margaret's lips curled into a thin smile, as if she already knew what was coming. Victor shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming on the table. I kept my eyes on my hands, feeling the weight of their disdain even from across the room. They had never understood their father's quiet moments, the way he'd linger in the kitchen after dinner, sharing stories with me about his childhood or the war. To them, I was nothing, a servant, a shadow. But Charles had seen me. He'd seen the woman who'd lost her husband young, who'd raised a daughter alone, who'd poured her heart into keeping his home alive. The lawyer's voice pulled me back. To my children, Margaret and Victor, I leave the Blackthorn family trust, to be divided equally, provided they maintain the estate in its entirety for no less than 10 years. A murmur rippled through the room. Margaret's smile faltered, and Victor's drumming stopped. Maintaining the estate was no small task. Its upkeep had drained Charles's fortune even in his lifetime. There is, however, an additional provision. Mr. Harrow continued, adjusting his glasses. The primary beneficiary of Blackthorn Estate, itself the house, the lands, and all its contents is named as follows. He paused, and the room seemed to hold its breath. My heart thudded, though I couldn't say why. I had no claim here, no reason to expect anything. And yet, when Mr. Harrow spoke again, his words struck like a lightning bolt. To Eleanor Grayson, my faithful companion through decades of service. I leave the entirety of Blackthorn Estate to be hers in perpetuity, as a testament to her loyalty and the bond we shared. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. Victor let out a sharp laugh, as if the words were a cruel joke. The others in the room turned to me, their stares a mix of shock and contempt. I felt my face burn, not with pride, but with the sudden weight of being seen, truly seen for the first time in this house. Impossible, Margaret hissed, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. She's a servant. She's nothing. Mr. Harrow raised a hand. The will is clear. Mrs. Langley. It is legally binding, witnessed, and notarized. Mrs. Grayson is the beneficiary. Victor leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. This is absurd. Father would never. He did, I said quietly, my voice surprising even myself. All eyes turned to me, and I felt the years of silence unravel. He did, because he knew you'd let this place crumble. He knew you never loved it the way he did. The room erupted into chaos, but I sat still, clutching the edge of my chair. Charles had seen me, and now, at last, so would they. The shouting didn't stop for a long time. Margaret's voice cut through the din, sharp and unrelenting, accusing Mr. Harrow of fraud, of conspiracy, of everything but the truth. Victor paced, muttering about lawsuits and appeals, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from being blindsided. I stayed silent, my hands still gripping the chair, my mind racing back to the years I'd spent in this house. Every polished banister, every dusted portrait, every late-night conversation with Charles, they all seemed to pulse in the air around me, as if the estate itself were whispering its approval. Mr. Harrow raised his voice to restore order, his patience fraying. Enough, he said, slamming a folder onto the table. The will is ironclad. Mrs. Grayson's claim is indisputable. If you wish to contest it, you may take it to court, but I assure you, you will not succeed. Margaret turned her fury on me. You, she spat, pointing a manicured finger. You manipulated him. You wormed your way into his trust, didn't you? An old man, lonely, vulnerable, how dare you? I met her gaze, my own steadier than I felt. I didn't ask for this, Margaret. I served your father faithfully. I cared for him. If you'd spent half as much time with him as you did chasing his money, you'd know why he made this choice. Her face contorted, but before she could retort, Victor stepped forward. This isn't over. Eleanor, you think you can just waltz in and take what's ours? This estate belongs to the Blackthorn name. It belongs to me now, I said, the words feeling foreign yet true. And I'll honor it the way Charles wanted. The meeting dissolved into muttered threats and hurried exits, leaving me alone with Mr. Harrow. He looked at me with something like pity. They'll fight you, Mrs. Grayson. They have resources. I know, I replied, standing slowly. But I have something they don't. He raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Charles's trust. As I stepped out into the rain again, the estate loomed before me, its silhouette both haunting and comforting. I hadn't wanted fish and dreamed of it, but Charles had seen something in me that I'd forgotten, strength. I walked the grounds that evening, my shoes sinking into the muddy earth, remembering the man who'd changed everything. Charles had been more than an employer. In the quiet moments, when the house was asleep and the world felt small, he'd shared pieces of himself. He'd spoken of his regrets, how his ambition had cost him his family's love, how Margaret and Victor had grown distant, consumed by their own desires. He'd told me about his dreams for the estate, not as a monument to wealth, but as a sanctuary, a place where history and heart could coexist. I'd listened, never expecting those conversations to mean anything beyond the comfort of shared silence. Now, standing in the shadow of the great house, I felt the weight of his trust settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about ownership. It was about legacy. Charles had believed I could carry it, and I would, no matter what came next. The next morning, I returned to the estate, this time with a key Mr. Harrow had given me. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a foyer that felt both familiar and alien. The air was stale, the chandeliers dim, but the bones of the place were still strong. I wandered through the rooms, my footsteps echoing, memories flooding back. The kitchen where I'd brewed Charles's tea. The library where he'd read aloud from old novels, his voice warm and steady. The garden where we'd walked in silence, both of us grieving our own losses. I found a photograph on the mantel, one I hadn't seen before. It was Charles and me, taken years ago during a rare summer festival on the estate grounds. I was smiling, my hair still dark then, and he was looking at me with a softness that made my chest ache. I hadn't known the camera was there, but Charles had. He'd kept this moment, and now it was mine to hold. By noon, the first challenge arrived. A lawyer representing Margaret and Victor appeared at the gate, papers in hand, demanding access to the estate's financial records. I let him in, not because I was afraid, but because I knew transparency would be my shield. Charles had taught me that much truth. He'd said, was the only thing that lasted. The lawyer, a young man with sharp eyes, seemed surprised by my calm. You understand the family intends to contest this, Mrs. Grayson? I do, I said, offering him tea. But they'll find I'm not as invisible as they think. He left an hour later, his confidence shaken. I spent the rest of the day sorting through Charles's study, finding letters and documents that painted a clearer picture of his intentions. One letter, addressed to me but never sent, stopped me cold. In his elegant script, he'd written, Eleanor, you are the heart of this place. If they cannot see it, I will ensure they do. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. There was work to be done. The days that followed were a blur of legal letters and whispered threats. Margaret and Victor didn't come themselves, they sent lawyers, accountants, even a private investigator who lingered too long at the estate's gates. I felt their eyes on me, waiting for a misstep, but I refused to falter. Blackthorn Estate was mine now, not just in name, but in purpose. I began to see it as Charles had, a living thing, deserving of care, not conquest. I hired a small team to help with repairs. The roof leaked, the windows rattled, and the gardens were a tangle of neglect. Each task felt like a defiance of the Blackthorn heirs' disdain, a way of proving I was more than the shadow they'd made me out to be. The workers, local men and women who'd known Charles, treated me with a quiet respect that warmed me more than I expected. They shared stories of him, how he'd funded scholarships for their children, how he'd rebuilt the town hall after a fire. Charles had been their anchor, just as he'd been mine. One afternoon, as I sorted through a box of his old journals, I found a blueprint tucked between the pages. It was a plan for a community center on the estate grounds, complete with sketches of a library, a garden, and a space for local artists. Charles's handwriting noted, for the people of Blackthorn, who deserve more than my family's greed. My heart sank at the thought of how long this dream had been buried, but it also sparked something in me, a purpose beyond survival. I called Mr. Harrow that evening, my voice steady despite the audacity of my plan. I want to make Charles's vision real. I told him, the community center. I'll fund it with whatever the estate provides. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Mrs. Grayson, that's a bold move. The Blackthorns will see it as a provocation." "Let them," I replied. "This is what Charles wanted." The next morning, I met with a contractor to discuss the blueprint. His name was Tom, a gruff man in his 60s who'd known Charles since they were boys. "He always said you were the one who kept this place alive," Tom told me, his eyes crinkling with a smile. Looks like he was right. We walked the grounds, mapping out where the center would stand. The site was perfect, an open field near the estate's edge, close enough to feel part of the legacy, but separate enough to belong to the community. As we talked, I felt Charles's presence, as if he were nodding in approval. But the Blackthorns weren't idle. That evening, Margaret arrived unannounced, her heels clicking on the foyer's marble floor. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're making a fool of yourself, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "This estate isn't your playground. You're squandering my father's legacy on some ridiculous charity project." "It's his legacy I'm honoring," I said, standing my ground. "You and Victor never cared about this place. You wanted its wealth, not its heart." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you knew him better than us. You were his servant." "I was his friend," I said, the word feeling both heavy and true. "And he trusted me to do what you never would." She left without another word. But I knew this was only the beginning. The next day, a local newspaper ran a story about the will, painting me as a scheming opportunist who'd manipulated a dying man. The word stung, but I refused to let them define me. I wrote a letter to the editor, my hand shaking as I penned the truth. Charles Blackthorn had chosen me because he believed in me, and I would prove him right. The community rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Neighbors brought food, offered help with repairs, even shared their own memories of Charles. One woman, Clara, whose daughter had benefited from Charles's scholarships, hugged me tightly and said, "You're doing what he'd have wanted. Don't let them scare you." Their support gave me strength. But the Blackthorns' attacks grew sharper. Victor filed a motion to freeze the estate's accounts, claiming mismanagement. The legal battle loomed, but I kept moving forward, meeting with architects and donors to bring the community center to life. Each step felt like a promise to Charles, a way of saying, "I see you." Too. Late one night, as I sat in Charles's study, I found another letter, this one sealed and addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. His words were simple but piercing. "Eleanor, they will fight you, but you are stronger than they know. This estate is yours because you understand its soul. Keep it alive." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears finally spilling over. For the first time, I felt not just the weight of his trust, but the power of it. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to Charles, not to myself. The legal battle began in earnest, a storm of paperwork and accusations that threatened to drown me. Margaret and Victor's lawyers were relentless, questioning every detail of Charles's will, from his mental state to my influence over him. They painted a picture of me as a cunning interloper, a woman who'd preyed on a vulnerable man's loneliness. Each court date was a gauntlet, but I faced it with the same resolve I'd used to scrub floors and mend linens for 30 years. This was my home now, and I would fight for it. Mr. Harrow stood by me, his expertise a lifeline. He produced documents showing Charles's meticulous planning, including letters he'd written to friends and colleagues affirming his trust in me. One, written a year before his death, described me as the only person who sees Blackthorn Estate as a place of memory, not money. The judge, a stern woman with kind eyes, seemed to take note. Outside the courtroom, the community center project gained momentum. Tom and his team broke ground, and the sight of the first beams rising from the earth felt like a victory. Locals volunteered, bringing tools and time. Their faith in Charles's vision and in bolstering my courage. Clara organized a fundraiser. And soon, donations poured in from people I'd never met. Each one a reminder that I wasn't alone. But the Blackthorns fought dirty. One evening, I found a note slipped under the estate's door, and signed, but unmistakably from Victor. "You'll regret this." It read, "This isn't your place." I burned it in the fireplace, watching the flames consume the words. But the threat lingered. I began locking the doors at night, something I'd never done in all my years here. The turning point came unexpectedly. While sorting through Charles's library, I found a hidden compartment in his desk, concealed behind a false panel. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his handwriting. It wasn't just a diary, it was a record of his final years, detailing his disappointment in his children and his hope for the estate's future. One entry, dated 6 months before his death, read, "Eleanor is the only one who listens, who understands. If I leave this place to her, it will live. My children would tear it apart." I brought the journal to Mr. Harrow, who read it with growing excitement. "This is evidence," he said. "It shows his intent beyond doubt. They can't argue with his own words." The next court date was electric. Mr. Harrow presented the journal, reading key passages aloud. Margaret's face paled, and Victor's jaw tightened. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable but attentive. When the session ended, she requested a private meeting with both sides. I sat across from Margaret and Victor, their eyes avoiding mine. As the judge spoke, "This journal is compelling," she said. "It suggests Mr. Blackthorn's decision was deliberate and well-considered, unless you have evidence to contradict it. Mrs. Grayson's claim stands." Margaret tried to argue, but her voice lacked its usual venom. Victor said nothing, his hands clenched in his lap. They knew they were losing. That night, I walked the estate grounds, the air crisp with autumn. The community center's foundation was nearly complete, and I could almost see Charles's dream taking shape, a place where people could gather, learn, create. I thought of my daughter, Lily, who'd moved away years ago but called me every week. I told her about the will, the fight, the center. "You're doing something big, Mom," she'd said, her voice thick with pride. "Don't let them stop you." I didn't. The next week, I hosted a town meeting at the estate, inviting everyone to see the progress on the community center. The turnout was overwhelming. Hundreds of people, from farmers to teachers, filled the gardens. I stood on a makeshift stage, my knees trembling, and spoke about Charles's vision, about the legacy he wanted to leave. When I finished, the applause was deafening, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged here, not as a servant, but as a steward. Margaret and Victor didn't attend, but their absence spoke volumes. Their fight was faltering, and I sensed they were beginning to see the truth. This estate was more than money. It was a promise, one I was determined to keep. As winter approached, I found another letter from Charles, tucked in a book of poetry he'd loved. "Eleanor," it read, "you've always been the light in this house. Don't let them dim you." I smiled, tracing his words with my finger. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready. Winter settled over Blackthorn Estate, blanketing the grounds in snow and silence. The community center's construction continued, slower now but steady, each beam and brick a testament to Charles's dream and my resolve. The legal battle dragged on, but the journal had shifted the tide. Margaret and Victor's arguments grew weaker, their accusations more desperate. The judge's ruling was still pending, but Mr. Harrow was confident. "They're running out of moves," he told me, his smile rare but genuine. I spent my days managing the estate and the center's progress, my nights poring over Charles's papers. Each document, each letter, revealed more of the man I'd known, not the cold patriarch the world saw, but a soul burdened by regret and lifted by hope. One note, scribbled on a scrap of paper. Read, Eleanor. You remind me that kindness is never wasted. Save this place for those who need it. I tucked it into my pocket, a talisman against the doubt that sometimes crept in. The Blackthorns didn't relent entirely. Victor sent a new lawyer, a slick man who tried to intimidate me with talk of audits and liens. I listened politely, offered him tea, and sent him away with a promise to cooperate fully. Transparency was my armor. I had nothing to hide. Margaret, meanwhile, took to the press again, spinning tales of my supposed deceit. The stories hurt, but they didn't stick, not when the community stood by me, their voices louder than hers. One snowy evening, Clara arrived with a group of volunteers, their arms full of blankets and food for a charity drive we'd organized at the estate. The Great Hall, once a place of cold formality, buzzed with warmth and laughter. Children ran through the corridors, their voices echoing where silence had reigned. I watched from the sidelines, my heart full, and thought of Charles. He'd have loved this. As the event wound down, Clara pulled me aside. You're doing more than building a center, Eleanor, she said. You're giving us a home. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that this fight was about more than me or the Blackthorns. It was about the people who'd been forgotten, just as I had. The breakthrough came in early spring. The judge summoned us for a final hearing, her expression grave but decisive. She held up Charles's journal, its worn cover a stark contrast to the polished courtroom. This document, combined with Mr. Blackthorn's letters and testimony from his peers, confirms his intent. She said, Mrs. Grayson is the rightful beneficiary of Blackthorn Estate. The case is dismissed. Margaret's face crumpled, and Victor stormed out, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. I felt no triumph, only relief and a quiet sorrow for the family Charles had tried to save. They'd chosen greed over love, and now they'd lost both. That night, I walked to the community center's site, where the walls were rising, bathed in the soft glow of dusk. Tom met me there, his face lined with exhaustion but bright with pride. It's coming together, he said, gesturing to the structure. Charles would be proud. I hope so, I replied, my voice catching. I'm doing this for him. The next day, I received a call from Lily. She was coming to visit, bringing her children to see the estate. The thought of their laughter filling these halls made my heart ache with joy. I began planning a grand opening for the community center, set for summer. Invitations went out to the town, to Charles's old friends, even to Margaret and Victor, though I doubted they'd come. As I prepared, I found one last letter from Charles, hidden in a book of sonnets. It was short, written in a shaky hand. Eleanor, you are my legacy. Live boldly. I pressed it to my lips, a silent promise to do just that. The weeks leading to the opening were a whirlwind. The center took shoppy libraries stocked with donated books, a garden blooming with color, a hall for music and art. The community poured in, their energy a living tribute to Charles's vision. I felt him in every corner, his spirit woven into the walls. On the eve of the opening, I stood alone in the great hall, the silence heavy with memory. I was no longer invisible, not to the town, not to myself. Charles had seen me, and in doing so, he'd given me the chance to see myself. The morning of the community center's grand opening dawned bright, the summer sun casting golden light across Blackthorn Estate. The grounds were alive with activity volunteers hanging banners, children chasing each other through the gardens, musicians tuning their instruments. I stood at the edge of the new center, its doors open wide, and felt a swell of pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. This was Charles's dream, made real by hands that believed in it, by hearts that understood its worth. Lily arrived with her children, their laughter a melody I hadn't known I needed. My grandchildren, Emma and Theo, ran to me, their small arms wrapping around my waist. "Grandma, this place is huge," Emma exclaimed, her eyes wide as she took in the estate. Lily smiled, her hand resting on my shoulder. "You did it, Mom," she said softly. "You made something beautiful." The ceremony began at noon. The crowd gathered in the center's courtyard, their faces a mix of familiar neighbors and strangers who'd heard of Charles's legacy. I stepped onto the stage, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "This center isn't mine," I began, looking out at the sea of faces. "It belongs to Charles Blackthorne, who loved this town and its people. It belongs to you, who've worked to make it real. And it belongs to the future, to those who'll find hope and home here." The applause was warm, heartfelt, and for a moment, I felt Charles beside me, his quiet smile approving. I cut the ribbon, and the crowd surged forward, exploring the library, the art rooms, the gardens. Music filled the air, and I saw Clara dancing with her daughter, Tom laughing with his crew, children painting murals on the walls. This was what Charles had wanted a place alive with possibility. Margaret and Victor didn't come, but I hadn't expected them to. Their silence was their surrender, their absence a final acknowledgement that the estate was no longer theirs. I'd heard they'd moved to the city, their trust fund enough to keep them comfortable, but not enough to satisfy their greed. I wished them no ill, only peace. As the day wound down, I slipped away to the estate's old oak grove, where Charles and I had walked so many times. I carried his last letter, the one that called me his legacy, sitting beneath the largest tree. I read it again, my fingers tracing his words. Live boldly. He'd written, and I had. I'd fought for his dream, for this place, for myself. Lily found me there, her children trailing behind. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Better than okay," I said, smiling. "I'm home." We stayed until dusk, watching the stars emerge. The estate, once a place of shadows, was now a beacon of light. I thought of the years I'd spent invisible, my life measured in quiet service. Charles had changed that, not just by giving me the estate, but by giving me his trust, his friendship, his belief in me. The next morning, I began planning the center's future classes, events, scholarships in Charles's name. The estate was alive again, its halls filled with voices, its grounds with hope. I was no longer the help, the shadow, the forgotten. I was Eleanor Grayson, the woman who'd carried a legacy and made it her own. As I walked through the gardens, a breeze stirred the leaves, and I swear I heard Charles's voice, soft and warm. "Well done, Eleanor." I smiled, my heart full, and kept walking. The estate was mine, but more than that, it was ours, a place where no one would ever be invisible again.